Welcome. My name is Joep Hofhuis. I'm an assistant professor at Erasmus University Rotterdam. And today I'm here to present to you, also on behalf of my co-authors, Patrick Schafraat and Damian Trilling, both of the University of Amsterdam, as well as Nastasia Luca and Bastiaan van Manen, who contributed to this research project in the context of getting their master's degree at Erasmus University. I'm going to talk to you about a digital tool that we have developed together over the past few years. It's called DivPAR, and what it does is it conducts automated content analysis of cultural diversity perspectives in annual reports of organizations. And I will talk to you in the next 10 or 15 minutes about how this tool was developed, how it was validated, what you can do with it, and at the end we will give some ideas for future scholars on how to implement this tool to gain better understanding of how organizations communicate about cultural diversity and how that relates to organizational and societal outcomes. To start off with, I think many of you are probably familiar with the idea that organizations put out what we call diversity statements in different types of communication. This is a quote here from the annual report of ING, that's a large bank in the Netherlands, and they write something like, "Our approach to inclusiveness drives diversity, collaboration, and empowerment." And they say that they believe that the composition of their workforce should reflect society and their customers. That's an interesting statement about how they feel about diversity and why they find it important to conduct diversity management. Here's another example of another Dutch company that some of you might be familiar with. Heineken writes that diversity and gender are important drivers in their selection process. It's a short statement, but it tells you a bit about how they interpret this in selection and assessment. Of course, diversity perspectives in organizational communication have been around for quite a while. And one of the most common frameworks that is used to analyze them was developed almost 20 years ago by Robin Ely and David Thomas in the US. They conducted a qualitative study among a number of organizations where they asked employees and managers, why do you want to diversify? Why is diversity important for you as an organization? And they identified three different perspectives. I will go through them quickly. The first one is what I call the moral perspective. So that's the idea that organizations feel that it's their moral obligation or their social responsibility to provide equal opportunities and to increase equality in society. And you can see this in different types of statements. For example, when they say we aim to provide extra support for underrepresented groups, or we think it's our corporate social responsibility to diversify, that is indicative of the moral perspective. The second one is what we call the market perspective. And that is a perspective that is reflected in the idea that organizations want to be more diverse because they feel it will help them connect better with stakeholders. So it could be that it will help them sell products to other groups of customers that otherwise they wouldn't be able to reach. For public organizations, it can also be that they want to be able to understand and meet the needs of different groups in society. So it's about the connection between the organization and the culturally diverse society that they are in. And the third perspective is what we call the innovation perspective. And that is the idea that organizations say that diversity will help them become more flexible, more creative, will help them with problem solving, and just overall become a more productive and more innovative organization. So these are the three perspectives that were identified by Ely and Thomas. We know that they exist. We see them in all kinds of different organizational communications. But there are still a lot of questions that remain unanswered even after 20 years. So it's not yet really clear what the how these perspectives are represented in different types of organizational communication, which ones are more popular than others. We also don't know a lot about how they develop over time. If organizations maybe start off with one of the three and then over time also start communicating the other perspectives. And one big question that remains is whether they actually relate to diversity outcomes. So organizations that say that they want to increase diversity for, well, one of these reasons, do they actually then also practice what they preach and conduct diversity management and actually become better at managing diversity in the workforce? One of the reasons why it's been difficult to answer these questions is because in order to find the perspectives in organizational communications, you have to do a manual content analysis. You have to actually read all of these documents or websites or advertisements and manually code which of the perspectives you find. And that is a very difficult and time-consuming task. And in order to make that easier and also more reliable, we have decided to develop a digital script, a Python script that can do that automatically, can do it for you. So the aim of this project was to develop and validate a digital tool for specifically automated content analysis of these three perspectives by Eli and Thomas in organizational communication. And we have specifically decided to, for the first version of this script, to focus on annual reports of organizations. And the reason for that is because they are easy to get. They're publicly available. You go to a website, you can download them. They're usually digitalized, so they are in PDF format, and so they're easy to store and easy to archive. They're published at regular intervals every year. Most organizations are required by law to publish an annual report, and they're in English, which means that you can look at annual reports from organizations from a lot of different countries and compare them easily without having to resort to translations and all that kind of stuff. So for developing and testing the script, looking at annual reports was the most logical choice. So about the script, what we did is we developed the script in Python, and it basically consists of three different sections. So what this script does is it starts off by loading the PDF of the annual reports that you put into it. It converts it to plain text. And then it goes through that text and identifies what we call trigger words. So those are words like cultural diversity, ethnic diversity, different cultural backgrounds, cultural differences, race, things like that. So these are some examples. So the real list of trigger words is much longer. So it goes through the text of this report. It identifies if it finds any of these terms. And then when it finds one, it looks 2 sentences above and 2 sentences below that word. And there it looks for specific word combinations or phrases that we found are indicative of one of the three perspectives. So for example, if it finds the word cultural diversity, it will then look 2 sentences above and below to see if it finds the word social responsibility. And if it does, then the script ticks the box and says this report contains the moral perspective of diversity. And this goes very quickly, so you can just throw in a lot of different reports, and then over time, the script builds a big database which tells you exactly which reports from which years contain which of the three perspectives. And we did a full validation study. I will not bore you with all the details on that, but after several iterations of updating the script, we found it to be sufficiently reliable. Krippendorff's alphas are above 0.9. And if you're interested in the details of this, then please have a look at the publication that is about to come out on this as well. So yeah, after developing this, testing it, validating it, the script works. I'm going to present to you a very brief illustration of the kind of data that it puts out. For example, we first looked at a sample of annual reports of 55 large organizations in the Netherlands, including organizations from many different sectors. So there's large multinational companies like Shell, Philips, some finance like ING and ABN that we already mentioned, services industry like KPMG, Deloitte, consultancies, but also nonprofits. Amnesty International and Greenpeace both have a big headquarters in the Netherlands, so their annual reports were also included. And in total, we had 55 organizations, and we looked at 939 reports from a range of 1998 to 2018. So for most of these organizations, we had a full range of almost 2 decades, but for some they were missing, particularly the older reports were sometimes a little bit more difficult to find. So we put the sample through our Python script, and what we found, I will present to you very brief graphs of the prevalence of the three perspectives in these samples. So for the moral perspective, we found this. This is actually really interesting. If you look at so we can identify an upward trend here, firstly. And you see that in the late 90s, early 2000s, about 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 organizations mentioned this perspective, but that has gone up quickly. And by now, so in 2018, the last year that we had complete, almost all Dutch organizations, so nearly 100%, mention this perspective in some way, shape, or form. And that shows you how popular and how commonplace it nowadays is to make a diversity statement in an annual report. For the market perspective, we see a similar trend, except it's much lower. So we also see a bit of an upward slope. And in the more recent years, about 1 in 4 organizations mentioned this perspective at some point in their reports. And for the innovation perspective, it's very similar, except a little bit higher, so a bit in between the other two, also going up. And in recent years, we see that about a third or so of organizations mention the innovation perspective, so also going up. Comparing the three, you see that again, the moral perspective is by far the most common and the most prevalent. The other two are slowly gaining ground, but are not yet at the same level of the moral perspective. So this gives you a bit of an idea of the type of data that come out of this script and the way that you can interpret these. The big question, of course, is what can scholars do with this kind of information? So we formulated a number of future research directions that we think are interesting. The first one is that we believe that it might be useful to look at individual level effects. So what do these perspectives and organizations say about employee well-being? What do they say about the individual diversity outcomes, like prejudice, stereotyping, things like that? And if you have information from employees in a large number of different organizations, the script allows you to then very quickly and easily identify the main perspectives that are communicated by these organizations and correlate that with these individual level findings. You can also look at organizational level. So are the perspectives related to things like inclusion, diversity climate is a popular variable there. And also you can, of course, relate it to organizational performance, innovation scores, things like that. And what I think is particularly interesting also is to test whether or not the perspectives then relate to actual diversity outcomes. So is it so that organizations that communicate and say that they find diversity important and that they want to be socially responsible, or that they feel it might lead to more innovation, are they also more likely to have diversity policy and effective diversity management in place? So that's for the organizational level. Thirdly, of course, there's interesting comparisons to be made on the societal level. So we can test whether these different perspectives are more prevalent in certain countries or regions, or in certain sectors. Maybe non-profit organizations might be more likely to have a certain perspective than for-profit organizations, things like that. We can look at the relationship between diversity perspectives and political or societal discourse. And what's also interesting, I think, for intercultural scholars is, can we find relationships with existing cultural dimensions, like individualism, collectivism, power distance, maybe also with tightness, looseness, things like that. And do we find that countries that have a certain profile are more likely to have organizations that communicate about diversity using an innovation perspective versus a moral, for example? So these are all, future research directions. These are all things that we can do with this script and questions that we can answer in the future by using this tool. Finally, there's some future directions for the script itself. So right now it only looks at perspectives on cultural diversity, but of course we can also use it to look at perspectives on gender diversity, sexual orientation, age, things like that. For that, the script would need to be updated and validated again, but that's something that we hope to be able to do in the future. We can also look at other types of organizational communication. We should be able to input text from websites or from social media. That's something that we're working on currently. And another option, of course, would be to look at different diversity perspectives. So not only the ones by Eli and Thomas that I now mentioned, but also other types of perspectives that are out there, or more finer, detailed differences in the different perspectives that we could identify. So these are all still directions in which the script itself could be improved. So I hope to have given you a bit of an overview of what we've done and how the script can be used by different people. I would like to thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions about this project, feel free to contact me by email. If you're interested in maybe using DivPAR in your own research, it is available as an open source tool. It's free and anybody can use it, and it can be found on GitHub. And you can follow the link on this slide. Thank you again.